in the first week of August 2021, so that was August 1st to the 8th, the Red Nation and Red Media delegation organized on Oahu in the Hawaiian archipelago in the Pacific. And those of us on this particular episode of the Red Nation podcast were members of the delegation, and there will be subsequent podcast shows of other folks that were members of the delegation from Red Nation and Red Media. We organized and went on this solidarity delegation for a very particular reason, and the reason was to contribute in supporting water protectors on the ground on the island of Oahu, where I'm from in Hawaii, and to intervene in the Red Hill water crisis, but also to engage in many other shared struggles on the ground by Indigenous peoples in Hawaii that we also not just exceptionally share with other peoples from all over the world, Indigenous and colonized alike. And so our contribution to the support was really pretty interesting because the Red Hill water crisis, which we'll talk about in this episode, didn't occur in like a political vacuum. It occurred because of military occupation in Hawaii. The Red Hill water crisis is a function of the U.S. military occupation in the Hawaiian Islands. And it begins in the 19th century, and it continues to persist today, in this case through jet fuel, for instance, leaking into a sole source aquifer on the island of Oahu. So we collaborated with water protectors on the ground from especially Oahu Water Protectors. Shout out to Oahu Water Protectors in a large organizational collaboration to support their efforts and also to be in solidarity with them. And in that context, we are going to be talking about that work in this particular episode. And so I'm Uahikea Maile. I'm the VP of Red Media and also an at-large member of the Red Nation. I'm Kānaka Maoli. I'm from Oahu, but my family's also from Kauai Island and Hawaii Island.
I'll go ahead and introduce myself next. Is that what we're doing? All right, cool. Morning, everybody. I'm Jen Marley. You know me from the Red Nation podcast that I co-host with Nick. I'm excited to talk about this because this delegation was so profound. The amount we learned, the amount we experienced in such a short amount of time, the lifelong connections we made. This has truly been a highlight, I think, for Red Nation and Red Media in 2022. And I'm excited to get into the parallels between the struggles there and struggles here, especially as it pertains to the militarization of our lands.
I can go next. My name is Kiley. I'm Dene. I am the program director for Red Media. I also hold a leadership position in the Red Nation. I'm currently calling in from Tiwa territory, also known as Albuquerque, New Mexico. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I'm also really excited because I think this is the first time I've ever been on the podcast with you all, this particular group. So.
Thanks. Hello, my name is Dana. I'm a member of the Red Nation, also a part of leadership as well. My pronouns are her, she, and I'm also in Tiwa territories, and I was honored to really take part in this delegation. I've participated in other delegations, but this one set the standard of expectations and production, and true camaraderie between different nations and different peoples. So I was very excited and honored to be a part of this, and I'm actually looking forward to share my experiences of what I've experienced, what I've gone through. And, you know, again, it really set the standard of what Red Nation and Red Media, you know, we had the potential to, you know, go international, and how we, you know, fight for these causes that are very similar. So we'll break that down later. Thank you.
Hello and good morning to everybody. My name is Mayra. I am mestiza of Mexican and Panamanian descent. I am part of the Red Nation, and I was honored to be part of this amazing delegation to Kānaka lands. And yes, really looking forward to this exchange. Thanks.
I kind of want to back up just for a second, and thanks everybody for, you know, introducing yourselves and for sharing a little bit about your roles and where you're coming from and what nations and communities you're from. I want to back up and just paint the picture for a second, because I don't think I did a good job when we first started. So the Red Hill bulk fuel facility that was built starting in the 1940s, and finished in 1943. It was built during World War II in a mountainside, essentially. Has been leaking hundreds of thousands of gallons of jet fuel that is stored there to supply military machinery, cruise ships, jet fighters in Pearl Harbor, which is a harbor on the island of Oahu that has been an intensely militarized site since U.S. empire has eyed the Hawaiian Islands, right? These tanks have leaked jet fuel and other petroleum products into the environment on the island, and have polluted not just the water aquifer that feeds like 500,000 people on the island, but have specifically poisoned people that live nearby this particular facility. So it was built in secret during World War II. It still has been in operation all this time, is now shut down, undergoing a defueling process. But people are still sick. People have left Hawaii. Military personnel that have been poisoned have left Hawaii and are still dealing with the consequences of being poisoned by jet fuel. And that's also true for the island itself. Like, how do you clean jet fuel from a water aquifer, right? These are all questions that were critical for us to not just think and study and write about, but to intervene in on the ground. And that's the context at which we responded as the Red Nation, as Red Media, to support Oahu water protectors, but also other organizations like Ko'ohevai, Sierra Club Hawaii, other organizations on the ground that we worked with while we were there, to not just bolster the support on the ground, but to put the message out, because this is still a pressing issue that in the context of the defueling process being engaged, the international community thinks that this issue is resolved, but it's not, right? And so us talking about it today and reflecting on our experiences and the connections continues to press the issue that this is an ongoing one. Yeah, so I don't know. Does anybody want to like open us up to think about sort of their experiences and connections?
I can try to start. Start us off. Okay, so I just, from my own like personal studies, I think we can all like relate or say, you know, that Hanani K. Trask was sort of like our foundation for feminist studies, but also just like our sort of like compass for indigenous like nationhood. And so from learning and reading from Honani K. Trask, I had already, you know, like made this commitment that I would never go to Hawaii. Like I would just never go in my lifetime. So we were invited by Kānaka Maoli, like organizers and Oahu water protectors to go and like see what was happening on the ground, to like get the real like story of Hawaii and the history, besides like what is like sold to us by the US, the military. And it's interesting because like if you go on YouTube and then you just like type in Hawaii, it's all of these vloggers and just really gross like tourist traps. Like it's trying to trap you into tourism, right? To go to all these different locations in Hawaii, like Waikiki Beach and like snorkeling and just all of these, I don't know, just all of these like adventurous, like tropical ideas or just like tropical locations you can go to. But it's other settlers, it's tourists that are selling you this like idea of paradise. But like when it comes to Hawaii, it's like, just as someone who's speaking as an outsider, you have to sort of like battle or like confront all of these stereotypes and these ideas of Hawaii within yourself. Like I feel like that's where it really begins. If you're studying studying struggle, studying movements, you have to sort of do that like internal work of identifying like what is like a capitalist notion of like a struggle or of a people. And so I think in preparing for this trip, that's what I did. I had to sort of like identify the lies, like it's identifying the lies, right? And it seems like obvious, but it's also just like something that you're not really conscious of until you're actually like doing it. And I also think too that with Hawaii, there's just so many stereotypes, like so many stereotypes I'm aware of now than I wasn't before. Like hula hoops, that's so racist. And like, and then just how they try to sell you the ideas of like participating in a luau or all of those things, you know? And it's like, you shouldn't be doing those things unless it's like dictated by Kānaka Maoli. Like, shouldn't be like touring Hawaii unless you're invited or it's like dictated by Kānaka Maoli. And I think during our trip, during our delegation, they were sharing with us, I can't remember who, but it was someone from Oahu Water Protectors, but they were sharing with us during lockdown or like the start of the pandemic, the tourism came to a halt. So like, and Hawaii was just like really quiet. They were able to visit places that they don't usually have access to because of all the tourists and like because it's so crowded all the time. So I think that's like one thing that I like really took to heart, because I didn't, like that's the idea of paradise, right? Like there's no tourists, you have access to your land, you can visit your sacred places without having to be bothered by like someone wanting to take your picture or yeah. But sorry, that was kind of long, but but that's basically, what I did. Like kind of as like prepping for the trip and getting into like the right, just, you know, being like a good guest and wanting to be respectful and like treat like Hawaii and like Kānaka Maoli with like dignity. Yeah.
Thanks, Kylie. I'll go ahead and go next. So I've actually experienced visiting the islands before when I was younger. And the reason was because my mom went to college there. You know, and this is a woman, you know, who from the middle of the res, grew up in a hogan, you know, walking down the muddy road to catch the bus, hopefully, you know, and, you know, that was her ticket kind of out of the reservation, out of, you know, current conditions that she was experiencing, and Hawaii offered that opportunity for her. And one thing that she told me about, I mean, yeah, there was the huge influx of tourism when she was in college as well, but she always reminded me the connection that she had with people. And it wasn't so much like the tourism or anything like that. It was actually creating that sense of ohana. And, you know, most indigenous families come up with, you know, broken homes and broken systems, you know, things that are very disadvantageous to them, you know, and we create these like negative stereotypes as well, you know, and how we really fight for survival. So her experience in Hawaii actually changed a lot of her perspective on, you know, the power of family, the power of fighting for family, fighting for, you know, your beliefs and, you know, connecting with land. You know, and unfortunately, she didn't have that great experience growing up because, again, you know, it was a day-to-day survival for her when she was younger. So she always made me make sure that, you know, that's what I knew and that's what I understood of what Hawaii was. You know, it wasn't just a tourism trap. It was the people. It was the land. And I think, I know we talked about this previously, like how tourism is sold as well, but it's even like how healing is sold as part of the experience of going to Hawaii, you know. And I don't want to say that, you know, that was part of my experience. I mean, it is, you know, I was in my first trimester being pregnant, and I was, you know, morning sickness was awful, but, you know, I truly believe, you know, since I connected with the Aina, you know, I was able to actually eat some really good food and, you know, take care of myself, take care of my body and my baby. And that was part of the process, but we didn't go there for that, you know. We weren't going there for yoga or for, like, you know, connecting with some sort of totem. I don't know, like the shit that, oh, excuse me, the stuff that they sell on advertisements and things like that, you know, like come to Hawaii to heal your soul, come to Hawaii to, you know, recuperate, you know, yourself. You know, we actually went down there to work. I mean, we all understood that, you know, once we go down there, day one, I mean, we were out there early in the morning getting ready to really not just engage with the community, but to also learn. And I'm pretty sure we'll touch on this later, but, you know, we had a detour of the island that really exposed how militarism is pretty much Hawaii. And that's disturbing. And when you come from communities like ours, you know, like I'm Dene, you know, we have uranium. You know, and that's, you know, how that infrastructure is created by militarism as well. And, you know, and it is exploited still to this day, you know. And then Hawaii has a whole different experience in which, you know, I share that frustration with. And, you know, I was actually very honored that, you know, Kānaka and the Oahu Water Protectors organized a lot of these de-teaching, I guess you could say, of, you know, learning about who Kānaka is, where Kānaka is, you know, what who is the Aina, you know, and how do, you know, how is that reciprocity created between people and the land and the water. It's very different from us because we're, you know, we're semi-desert people, you know, but our appreciation of water is one and the same. You know, our appreciation of our land and non-human relatives is the same. So I think that, that really grounded, that perspective of, how we connecting with this delegation. It wasn't just a political venture. I mean, it was, but, we had that standard, not that standard, but we had that base of, understanding where, our connected our relatives are coming from. And yeah, I think we did had to battle a lot of stereotypes as well. We were a large brown delegation down there. And we did get some curious looks. I mean, we were even photographed as well, which is really weird. I mean, gosh, like don't photograph people, don't photograph brown people, don't photograph women. I mean, it's just disturbing, and just a lot of those experiences were very, I don't know, I want to say common in those spaces, but it was still very disturbing. We shouldn't be exposed to those, anybody. And yeah, and it was an incredible experience, because I went there to learn, and I was pretty much shocked about how much and how horrendous, Kānaka or relatives are living to this day. Not just our, their relatives in the past, but to this day, they're fighting for water, they're fighting for, their culture and things like this. And it just, I mean, it hurt, but it gave that, that ability to really understand, and appreciate the struggle, that, it's not just here, it's everywhere, and that we need to just connect and make sure that those experiences are not just, based on a stereotype of paradise. There's a lot more going on the bottom of that. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, nothing really prepares you to learn about just the immense amount of violence that took place there. Like, and almost every place we went was a sacred place, and also a site of militarization. And it was just like heart-wrenching the whole time. Like hearing elders tell beautiful emergent stories, and then point out that the place where that story took place is now a military base. Or showing us, these images in their mountains, faces and figures, and then pointing out a telescope on them, right? Like, every place we went to was so powerful, and you could really feel it, and it was beautiful, but they were also like actively being desecrated and protected too, right? And it just reminded me of the way, just the soullessness of imperialists, right? Look upon such a beautiful place and decide to designate it as a wasteland. And there's huge swaths of land that are literally contaminated with depleted uranium, right? Tests, rim pack. Recently, a scholar who wrote a book about nuclearism in New Mexico, Mariah Gomez, said that New Mexico isn't a sacrifice zone, because in order for it to be a sacrifice, it would have had to have value to begin with in the eyes of the government. And so I've been thinking about that as it pertains to Hawaii too. How does one become incapable of recognizing and feeling the power in such a bountiful land that it has no value to begin with, unless it's being used for military practice, unless it's being used for storage, for weapons. Like, it's devastating. And it also made me realize that, in fact, Oahu is the first site of the Manhattan Project, which is something that I don't think is named very much, at least not by people on the continent, not by natives on the continent, really, because that's where Pearl Harbor happened, right? And that was the justification for building and, you know, continuing to build atomic weapons. And when we visited the Pearl Harbor Memorial Site, the first thing you see is this big map on the ground that includes all of the places where the Manhattan Project took place. Or not, it's not even the Manhattan Project, but it includes geographic sites that are relevant to, you know, Pearl Harbor. And it includes Los Alamos. That's the easternmost location. So already in that, there's this acknowledgement themselves, right, of the role that Los Alamos, right, my homeland, my emergent place, plays in the militarizing of Kanaka homelands. And so that was like really profound for me. And it became clear that, like, you know, the Manhattan Project, the bomb itself, was conceived on Oahu and birthed here in my homeland, on Tewa lands. And it's just, I don't know, that juxtaposition of the creation of death alongside life still flourishing. And it was really ironic because that harbor there at the Pearl Harbor Memorial Site was actually like, it had like buoys in the water where it was blocked off because that water was so heavily contaminated because it was right there next to the Red Hill storage facility. So even the people visiting the memorial, the people working there, are directly exposed to some of the worst of that. And it's ironic too, like Ua was saying, like, this impacts military personnel first usually. And I have a lot to say about, like, the Manhattan Project and the creation of the bomb, but one thing I'll end on that was, like, especially profound for me was realizing that this means of manufacturing consent to the militarization of your land was really, like, created and perfected in Hawaii. And those same tactics were brought and used on us when it came to stealing our land to create Los Alamos, the first site of the Manhattan Project. And so in even some of the plaques there at the memorial, and what we were told by some of the guides is that they sought out spiritual leaders from the community and bribed them and coerced them into agreeing to have Pearl Harbor built there on what was a sacred reef. And they told us some of the stories and the significance of that reef. And with their quote-unquote approval, they linked narratives, the narratives of those old stories, and even like the spiritual aspect to the project of militarization. Or they created this kind of like distorted, like deformed narrative using Kanaka stories and spirituality to try to justify this project of militarism. And that's exactly what happened when the Manhattan Project was being brought here. They sought out spiritual leaders and artists to back up and to legitimize these incredibly destructive, horrific projects. And so I also think we can look at that as a site where tourist narratives originated, right? How do we sell spirituality and militarism at the same time? Like, it's something I've been thinking about a lot, along with the concept of militarism, right? There's always this kind of mystical backing that's sold with the tourism narrative, and also the narrative of conquest. And so, yeah, we need to talk about Hawaii when we're talking about the Manhattan Project, when we're talking about nuclear colonialism, when we're talking about imperialism, because if you ask me, that is the true conception place. But nonetheless, what we saw there was such an amount of resistance from Kanaka people. Like, the way you all have political concepts in your language, right? Like hui aloha aina, the way your organizations and your movements go back to, the beginning of defending your land, the way you have like such sophisticated like politics and concepts is beautiful. And like, I just, again, like, such an honor and a privilege to continue to learn from you all and your fierce resistance. And I think everybody in the world needs to look to Kānaka resistance as the tip of the spear against imperialism.
I would like to add a little bit to what Jen just mentioned, because indeed the amount of change that is brought by the imperialist project of the U.S. Has impacted Hawaii and Kānaka people, but it spreads out throughout Abya Yala, throughout the rest of the global South, and this has produced a series of narratives, as Jen has mentioned, that have become so normalized in terms of what is the process of modernization and this industrialization of Latin America. And in the case, me being a person of Panamanian descent and having studied the way that the Panama Canal was created and the appropriation of an area around a waterway to make the jurisdiction of the United States, that didn't get back legally to the Panamanian population and local peoples until 1999, but created this country, Panama, and separated it from Colombia in 1903. So it just makes me think about this in many levels, because Hawaii really, from the moment I arrived, I had a series of emotions happening through me, because it smelled and felt just like Panama in terms of weather, in terms of flora, the flowers, the humidity. It just felt like home. And going through, the first day, as we were mentioning, that first day when we visited so many places the first day, but finishing with the Pearl Harbor National Memorial Place was just another, heartbreaking experience in terms of seeing how this narrative has been built throughout the years, where a piece of land is just completely appropriated, changed, destroyed, and handled in a way that serves the purposes of imperialism. So it just had all these like parallels with Panama, and Panama was in that map, in that place, as another place of importance of imperialism. So to me, it's just everything that creates any military base of the United States in Latin America has that history. It sometimes even like, and just to like add to the geostrategic plan of imperialism today, like even when the Panama Canal was returned to Panamanian people, that created a whole other wave of military bases in Latin America through the Plan Colombia. So like this is not just environmental degradation and appropriation and destruction of natural ways and indigenous peoples, sacred lands and destruction. It also creates this like other, it constructs a whole other narrative about what progress and, capitalism must do. And in the case of Panama, Puerto Rico, we see just like, it's a distortion of people's political choices, it's a distortion of people's way to deal, relate to the land anymore because of all the environmental damage. There's no cleanup really when these military places are left behind. And we can talk more about that. But so U.S. military installations are always, they lack transparency and they lack accountability and have completely, degraded these spaces. And here we are, right? Like today, like visiting, we were lucky enough to have all that information and to be received in such a, beautiful way by Kānaka people. But we were able to not be drawn by this whole other narrative of, tourism or capitalist, entrepreneurship and all that. But a lot of people in the world just have that narrative normalized. And to me was, as a person from Latin America, it just felt like I don't know, like you are told that Hawaii is part of the United States, right? Like that's the official story, and you don't get to know these histories behind unless you look deep and you try to dissolve this other narrative. So I felt completely like I had so much going on in my mind, and my heart was just heartbroken. But as Jen said as well, you can see the relationship. You can see people's, Kanaka people's strength and Kanaka people's resistance and power. And in that way, I felt connected to them. And I felt like I was part of that struggle as well because of where I come from and what my family has been through and people in Abya Yala in general, So I particularly feel like we can talk more about that, about those, what is happening in Red Hill like that, and all the ecological and environmental and spiritual damage of the places that we visited.
It's wild to think about that the first tourists in Hawaii were military officers that were sent on a secret mission to discover and locate a particular site that could be useful to the U.S. military. And thus, Pearl Harbor was the site discovered and located by officers like General John Schofield in the 1800s. But they were operating under this guise that they were just visitors, just tourists that showed up. That's one way to approach coming to Hawaii. Another way is to be invited, right? To be invited to participate in solidarity, in struggle, in work. And that was a really important part of our delegation, right? Everywhere we went, we had to ask for permission. Myself, I had to practice some oli or chants to ask for permission on our behalf for the Red Nation, Red Media, but also on the behalf of other folks, even folks that I didn't know. And it really re-engaged me to consider what it means to show up in a space, even in my own homeland, right? But what's super important too is that these are spaces and places that are diverse, not homogenous, right? Like, and I think that's true for thinking about struggles that Indigenous peoples face all over the world, and the way even anti-imperialists and allied folks show up to support and provide solidarity, right? We're not all from the same place, even within an Indigenous community. And the way that we showed up was in a way that was under invitation, and also from me, because I've been an Indigenous person on other Indigenous lands, like in Albuquerque, for instance, in Tiwa territory, and have known what it's like to be a unwelcomed or uninvited guest, right? Like I went for school, no one invited me. I chose to go, and like showing up in that space and being invited to come to frontline struggles, right, in Santa Fe, or to show up in the streets of Albuquerque to do certain things. That's the kind of bond that gets built that can sustain ongoing political struggle. And I guess like I'm curious like how you felt about showing up more specifically, like in Hawaii, and the bonds that were built in that process to not just protect water on Oahu, but to engage in a larger struggle to protect water, people, our ecosystem elsewhere too.
I can talk a little about that. So, yeah, I mean, I was conflicted going to begin with. And I like Kylie, I thought, I'll never visit in my lifetime, because why would I, when the demands from Kānaka people are very clear and very accessible, right, to not come. Anyone who goes is blatantly refusing to respect the wishes of Kānaka people, right? It's not like it's unknown or obscure knowledge, right? And I think, like, when Oahu Water Protectors invited us and we started talking and having those planning meetings, I think the thing on our minds was like, what can we do to be useful? What can we do to like make up for our presence there? What can we do to like literally see that we have as little of a negative impact there on the land and on the people as possible? And I thought, like, if like, to me, this delegation was historic, right? And it's an international delegation too, right? Because Hawaii is not America. And I saw it as a huge honor and a huge privilege, but like a huge responsibility that like it is gonna like will go well beyond the delegation itself, right? We have lifetime obligations now to the relatives that we met and made there, human and non-human. We have lifetime obligations to not only uplift their work and their struggle, but to give of ourselves and our resources and our labor to give them what they need, right? To make sure that these victories keep coming, because there are victories too, and we experienced a victory while we were there. The University of Hawaii was going to drop studies on the impacts of the leakage from the Red Hill site, and they revoked that information. But because of the combined efforts of all of us on the delegation, our media efforts, we forced them to republish that information. So like seeing that you can have those small victories in real time with that combined effort and solidarity, like, showed us that what we're doing is real and is powerful and does like carry out change. And so imagine what we could do, together, like moving forward, right? If we had more than a week, if we had more than the time frame of a delegation. And even more than that, like, to me, like, me and Justine, were Tewa, and we were observing like linguistic similarities, like cultural similarities that were so spot on that it was like, we were really, really emotional. It was really profound. And in a way, it's like I feel that I have like an even deeper obligation, right? As somebody who lives in the site, right, of the Manhattan Project too, like it's a lifetime obligation that we have. And it just goes so beyond the scope of just the political work, right? Or just, this one delegation. This is something that I hope, or this is something that I know Red Nation is going to stay committed to, right? This is work that we're always going to prioritize. Because again, too, like, everybody's talking, I feel like the tip of the spear euphemism is a little overused, but like, what Kānaka people have, that power, that's the power that can bring us into a new world for real. Like, the intense love, like just the fearsome love that you all have for each other and the land. I just can't wait till we can regenerate that here for ourselves on the continent. Like, I feel like a lot of Indigenous people here are very lost, and you all are anything but lost.
Oh gosh. So I'm gonna be kind of like a bit of a cornball, but I'm just gonna go there. So when I was like a new-ish member of the Red Nation, I sometimes would have conversations with older members, like Jen, Demetrius, Melissa, about like the history of Red Nation and like who was all there. And Uahikea, like your name came up so much, and this was like before I had even met you. I think you were gone by this time, but yeah, they would always talk about like the speeches that you would make on behalf of Red Nation and the organizing. You're a founder of Red Nation. You started the No Dead Natives campaign, which is still a campaign that's running today. And so when we were approached to go on this delegation, I was just like, it's only right. Like, it's only right that we support our member and their struggle in their homelands, because in a way, like, you brought like that fire here and it ignited the Red Nation and our like organizing principles and like our principles of like taking care of each other and like solidarity. So you had already like planted that seed of like international like cooperation. So yeah, I don't know. I was just like, I mean, why, like, let's reciprocate that. So I think, yeah, it was just like a commitment of Red Nation, and also just like reciprocating like, I don't know, yeah, a relationship that had already been planted. And I think like what Jen was saying about the University of Hawaii pulling that study. Okay, so like being there and witnessing that in real time was wild. Like, because then we had like all this information beforehand about, there being like jet fuel in the water, and then seeing all the graphs and the studies, and then learning that it was going to be pulled, and then just like the next day, just like first thing in the morning, we were all, coming up with like media campaigns. We were all just like bouncing ideas off of each other, and Oahu water protectors were like practicing and like going over their statement for the press release. And then, yeah, so being in that like culture of resistance, it like really does change you. It kind of like, I think that day, and then the duration of I keep saying trip. I don't know why I keep saying trip. I'm sorry. The duration of the delegation, it like I don't know. It like I had to, it just like ignited something in me. Like, I guess maybe like a recommitment to movements, and like a recommitment to hope, because 2022 was just like, I think for a lot of people it was definitely a difficult year, and we were like, we just were up against so many like, I guess like injustices or like atrocities. There were also a lot of like changes in the weather, and just, it was like a year of change. But I think after the delegation, I just had to like rethink about my approach and just, what do I hope for the movement? Where do I see like us, and not just like Indigenous people in the US, but like us, like internationally. How do I see like our relationships with other indigenous people that are like under occupation? Because what I also realized was like what the US does like here in the US, they're also doing it like internationally, and just realizing the reach that it has, and just how like the states and the police, they're also like militarizing, but you know, so many communities like internationally have been like under under like severe like militarization and occupation. So I guess I was kind of coming to all of those realizations while in Oahu, and just like seeing it viscerally is just, it just has like an impact on you, versus like watching it from afar, because we have like, you know, access to social media and everything, but it's just so different learning and like hearing people's stories on the ground. But yeah, I'll end there.
Wow, thanks, Kylie. Yeah, and to answer your about like, you know, how you felt about showing up, you know, kind of address that, like, and maybe because I'm a family person, you know, I'm a mom, I approach things very differently. Or maybe because I'm a Pisces, you know, I have to love everything. But I think what was great about this, you know, about creating these bonds with people is that, you know, like especially Oahu Water Protectors, that they set a precedent. You know, they built a stronger narrative that, you know, that the military is also being watched, you know, by them. You know, that, you know, the military isn't untouchable, you know, as we're so called to believe, you know, that they can be held accountable. And with it, you know, with Red Hill, you know, you know, like it was a secret that, you know, the fuel was leaking. It wasn't exposed until like I forget when it was, like when people were having like getting sick on like Thanksgiving, you know, several years back, and they, you know, they created this whole, you know, new thing, like what are they not telling us? Why are we being poisoned? You know, and it compromised a lot of that, you know, that faith in military, which, you know, we as Native people, we understand that inherently, you know, but you know, it created this larger perspective for people who are non-Native. You know, they're like, you know, military folks, like, why can't I drink my water? Why are they dropping off water bottles for us to drink, to bathe in? You know, when we should trust our military, if, you know, if I'm a military member and things like that. And I think it really compromised, you know, the trust that people have in the military, which again, like Native people already know that, but it's gotten that broader perspective, you know, created allyship, which, you know, we appreciate. And I know, like, when we're doing our detour, we stopped at Red Hill. You know, we were learning, you know, at the spring, we were learning a little bit more about it, what had happened during an action there, and a military officer approached us, you know, trying to be friendly, I don't know, whatever, and he was like, and as he was departing and leaving, he was like, yeah, we're watching you, to us, to our group. And then one of the Kānaka folks was like, yeah, we're watching you too. You know, and that was like one of the most badass things I could hear on day one. You know, like, yeah, we're watching you too. Like, don't try to come at us. Don't try to intimidate us. Don't try to do this power thing on us, you know, because we are power. We are people power, you know. And I think that really solidified, you know, the presence of what, you know, Native people and Kanaka people can do. You know, it reaffirms that resistance is inevitable with us. You know, you can't expect us to lay dormant and let you poison us. I mean, the more you learned about Red Hill, you know, like people, you know, people's bodies were being poisoned. You know, and then I learned later too that, you know, it was affecting the reproductive health of women. And I took large offense to that, because that's just another form of extermination of Native people. If Native women can't reproduce, that's, you're killing us, you're killing off our people. And then, oh, it's for military reasons, and it's a secret. I don't know how that is not something that, doesn't get a larger framework, because it's really, it's killing people. You're not allowing kids to be born, and like even the schools. I remember them telling us that when Red Hill affected the nearby schools, including, I know at least one elementary school. I can't remember if it was two, but the kids were in there like washing their hands with like a pump, like they use for camping to wash their hands and do these things. And those elementary kids are exposed to this. How are we expecting young people, young kids to understand, what contaminated water is, and why they have to adjust their whole lifestyle to this? I mean, it was just so frustrating. The more you learned about this and how it's essentially a secret, it didn't come out until later. And even when the university had pulled back their report analysis, and when we made that media presence to like, hey, release the papers, release the report, it wasn't publicly known, and then again, this just happened last year. This just happened, not even last year, like a few months ago, and so, like how much control does not only the military have, but the institution of protecting the military, and that, we saw that with, the university. They're protecting military. Maybe it's because they're getting funding from them, maybe it's, some sort of secret alliances, but still we see the connections between that. And I really appreciate how the Kānaka relatives were really calling that out. Like this is BS, this is not real, this is not true, you guys are lying to us, and they really organized that. And I agree with, Jen, like it creates a whole attitude of how you approach these institutions. And again, like when I was little, I was always led to believe that the military is untouchable. They got to do what they got to do to protect, they got to protect America and stuff like this. But when you really look at it, like in Hawaii is, it's total BS. These areas that are infiltrated and infested with militarism is disgusting. And the military creates all this justification for their presence. And I just, we didn't see it. We didn't see it that way. There is no need for military in Hawaii at all. Red Hill's created as a pit stop. It's a gas station, right? We learned that about Red Hill. Red Hill is a gas station for battleships and battle cruisers and things like that. There's no need for that. And other areas that are occupied by military, not just Red Hill, but all throughout the island, like everywhere we went, there was not one place I don't think we went that wasn't touched by military. And I think that was kind of really disturbing, and very, even though, I feel like we should have been free to, educate ourselves and be spiritually free. I think it's we were invaded with, the disgusting feeling like we were always being watched, or we were already on, land that was bombed, and, all these other things, you could never really 100% connect with the land because it had already been desecrated by the military, and everybody had a story that we had met, that, everything from, I remember we had a Kānaka friend tell us that she hid in the middle of the mountain when they had that bomb scare several years ago, and that main highway, and so, she didn't know what to do, so she was already driving down the middle of the road. I forget which highway it was, but she just stayed dormant in the middle of the mountain because that's the only place she could think of to survive. And so it's really a life or death thing there. And I think, again, like how I talked about my mom, she experienced life or death things daily, but that's due to more financial and things like that. But, this one was bombing, raids and things like that. I mean, while we were there, it was at the end of RIMPAC, we heard jets flying by all the time, and it was, you couldn't even be in a place, and I, like, you could, like, when you go into a space, you know, you want to be 100% in that space, you know, even politically, emotionally, and things like that. You know, you're trying to do this, but you kept hearing those jets come by, you know, you kept seeing military officers and military people, or like, we dedicate this place because it's U.S. Army area, blah, 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 blah. And, you know, like how can you engage with these spaces when it's already invaded by another one? And I think that's what really Kānaka relatives really taught us, like, F the military, F the institution, because this is our land. You know, they can't push us out. We will push our way in. You know, they can say that they have a higher up in us, but there's nothing higher than our connection to the land, to the water. You know, and they really provided that resistance and that love and, you know, like, even anger, you know, like, when we shared tears, you know, like, about what was going on, you know, you could really feel that change in attitude that I hadn't experienced on any other delegation, just because they were so incredibly dedicated and passionate and knowledgeable. You know, it wasn't just like an event to them, you know, they were 100% knowledgeable, and they brought people in, and they, you know, they showed us how they organize. And again, like, it set a whole new precedent of what I think organizing should be and look like. And I agree with Jen, like, we don't have that here. You know, we have different experiences here, but we don't have that really, like, I don't know. I wish there was a word for this. I could think of, like, there should be some Navajo word in my mind that describes what I'm trying to say, but I can't say it. But, you know, I think that really shows, like, how the larger struggle really connects us. And again, I find myself lacking. And that's a good thing. You know, I should be working harder and smarter. And I think that's what this delegation trip really exposed me to. You can go in with a fiery presence. You know, you can be the most badass Native women out there. But if you don't have that love that, like, these Kānaka women have, you know, like, you know, we need to really step up our game. And I really appreciate what they have shared with us.
Okay. I wanted to also add on what Dana just said and Kiley, because another thing that I experienced was I felt really like I was reminded a lot of Cuba when I was in the presence of Kānaka people and their you know, the power of their struggle. Like Dana was just mentioning, the knowledge, the amount of you know, focus and knowledge about specific places and specific moments and history, very much like in Cuba, and how proud people are of their revolution, and you know, specific data, like telling you things to the date and the hour of the day that happened, you know. And I was also, like, very much reminded in this, answering the question that Ua just posed, and very much how Kiley was mentioning about this nation-to-nation relationship. And I believe that in a lot of what the Kānaka people with their protocols and the way they honor the land and honored you as being there as a guest, and that you actually embody that by telling yourself remind yourself that you are a guest. You have to deconstruct those narratives in your mind that might be normalizing your behavior, and that behavior might be, you know, not the behavior that would honor that struggle. And so, like, to me, it was also like a realization that the connections that we see from the experiences that we've had in other lands, in other spaces, and with our own, you know, relatives, is because that's how it is supposed to be. Like, you are to go to those places to be woken up and make those relationships in where you're from and where you're at, and like Dana was saying, like, you know, be more disciplined, like, no. Because I think it's an Icelander thing, you know, just being surrounded by water really just puts you in a whole different way of relationship with the land. It's like, I don't know how to describe it, but I haven't really like understood it completely, but it's almost like it's so finite in that way. Like, you know exactly every single piece of your island, and because it's finite like that. And sometimes when you live in bigger spaces, like in Panama, people are like that too, because it's so small, and there's more rivers than land. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, there's like different relationship as you, and so what I'm trying to connect it with is with the nation building, and this very much indigenous tradition of nation crafting, like how you honor the other one. That happened in Cuba with the visit of Wampanoag people, to recognize the nation of Cuba, and I believe it's the name of Madber Anderson, who went there with a delegation, and Fidel was brought to tears, by the presence of indigenous people recognizing the nation of Cuba in the middle of war with the United States. So like I believe that's part of our job. That's part of like honoring each other's nations, and make yourself present that way, and know the histories of the land, and know that these narratives of imperialism and colonization and neocolonization and neo-extractivism continue to be bringing about all this destruction and transformation to the land and to the peoples. But we have to revive and continue saying these other stories, and and those parallelisms that we feel, because they're there too, and we need to keep them alive. That's how the revolutions are, put together, by this understanding that there's other histories of the land, that there's other things that were not imposed, that are not colonialism, that are not imperialism, and that they're there, and people are struggling like that. And I felt like I said, like I was just honored to recognize myself amongst Kānaka people, not because I'm in any way Kānaka, just because they're showing me my humanity and my stories, and they're doing it they're doing it with so much love. That's how I felt in love over there, like with everything and everyone, and as much as I was heartbroken, it was both things at the same time. And so, like, yeah, I would say that.
Absolutely, Maida. That perfectly sums up like how I was feeling too. Like I feel like we experienced the full spectrum of human emotion, like from being totally devastated to feeling totally in love, and just feeling like, I mean, I hadn't felt that alive in a very long time, which was kind of like, it was really something. But literally looking at like that hard love that goes into maintaining the land, right? Like when we met with our Affirm sisters and they took us to the loa and they took us in it and we got to help weed it a little bit, like that, those literal connections you make with the earth, right? Those literal connections you make with each other and non-human relatives, and the learning about just like the cultivation of kalo, how it should be the most accessible staple food source, but it's not, and how people are going so hard to revive it, right? We saw entire families working on their loa, and it was really beautiful. And then also thinking, I was like, we learned so much about how much militarization has depleted natural resources, right? How it's eroding the beaches, how it reduced staple, crops, how it completely deformed the landscape. But also, like, one of the most amazing things I learned while there was that all of the islands at one time were able to sustain and feed up to 3 million people. And, like, that just goes to show, like, the necessity of, like, having that sustainable reciprocal relationship with the land. Like, there's no reason that the land should be as devastated as it is. And it's only because of militarization and colonization that it's in that shape, right? Like, the islands are capable of regenerating themselves to provide for millions. Like,
I think one thing though is that, you know, we're talking about, you know, islands self-sustaining and stuff, things like that. It's, you know, I think that would be like the dream, you know, for a land to kind of take back and take care of itself and things like that. But we have areas that like Makua Valley that have, I mean, those were areas where bombs were dropped, you know, it was live action firing. I mean, when we went there, you know, we were really exposed to what militarization on a reservation land, you know, it's Makua Valley Reservation, military reservation. And so, like, you know, it can't, you know, like, how's that area going to sustain itself? It really can't, you know, because there's all, when we went there, when we got a tour of that with Earth Justice, I mean, we went through areas that had, like, bomb pits, you know, like, where the ground just sunk in, you know, where a bomb had been dropped. So we were walking across those areas, you know, we were guided, or I don't want to say guided because it wasn't a tour. I don't think so. But we were escorted through the area with these, you know, bomb security, bomb officials, you know, looking to see if there were other areas that had areas that, you know, or bombs that hadn't gone off yet, you know, like, and when we signed that waiver, I mean, I remember we were all tripping out because it basically said that we voluntarily assume that we give risk of our loss of property or life. So just walking through that area, you know, we signed away our right to life just to, you know, have cultural access to this area. Cultural access. And I mean, we're foreigners, you know, and our Kanaka relatives, you know, this cultural access that happens, once a month, you know, is their ability to go back to that land to heal it. But they had to be escorted through that area by military people. How devastating that is. You can't even go to your homelands. You can't even go to your home or your area, or even try to protect and take care of the land without a military escort. You know, and like, how do we revive the springs and things like that? And I always think about that, like, and I know I'm shifting topics a little bit, but, you know, like, Makua Valley was really, is an area that, you know, is used for live fire training from, like, what, the 1940s to as soon as, like, the early 2000s, right, where they were bombing and shooting and everything. And when we were there, you could see how the landscape actually changed. You can see, like, how the mountains aren't even mountains. They're just, like, you know, you saw where it was torn off, and we couldn't even go to specific areas. We couldn't go past, you know, the red tape along the whole area. And, like, it was very heartbreaking. And I'll share this story. When I was kind of hiking ahead of everybody, just because, I don't know, adrenaline. So I was waiting up at the top of the hill, waiting for folks to come up here, and then I was talking to one of the military escort guys, you know, just making small conversation, and he had shared with me that, yeah, we're taking care of the land, we're remediating the land. See that area over there? And he pointed to a distance. We're replanting trees. You know, we're replanting trees. We're putting native trees and all these things in there. So we're reestablishing, taking care of the land. And you know, this is what the military is. This is the next phase of military remediation on land. And and this is not just here. It's all across the continent as well. And he kept trying to ask where I was from, and I didn't want to really say because, you know, I don't trust people. But yeah, he was like, oh, and I was like, oh, okay. So what's your plan for uranium? And, you know, he just kind of got quiet and looked at me, and he was like, well, you do know that uranium is natural and organic, right? And I'm like, like, what do you say to somebody like that who was just pitching like 30 seconds ago about the military is doing all this work for, you know, replenishing the land and taking care of the land, and then makes like, oh, uranium's just organic. We know what uranium does. We know what it's used for. You know, we can't even go to these areas ourselves here on the continent, you know, and like this man who is like pitching this praise about what the military is doing, you know, really sets the standard what like military tourism is doing. You know, what you said, like Makua Valley's militarism. And I actually looked this up too, that so on malamamakua.org, they're that organization that's actually really trying to push to get, you know, the U.S. Army out of there. And on August 16, 2029 is when their 65-year lease on Makua Valley is up. They actually have a countdown on their website, which is pretty cool. But they want to return that land to the state and to the people. And, you know, the U.S. Army is trying to fight that and again put in another lease for for a lot more years, you know, for live fire training. They haven't used any live fire training there since the early 2000s. It's 2023 now. So, you know, again, like what is the use of the military having this land? You know, they have no use for this land, but we can't, like Kanaka people can't even access it. You know, it's depleted, it's eroded with bombing and all these other things that haven't surfaced yet as well. And, you know, like this area had birthing stones in it. You know, they had all these sacred sites in this area, and that's what the military thinks of, you know, indigenous lands. You know, there's no value to it to them. They're free to bomb it. They're free to use it however they want, even when they're not using it for what they want it for. You know, they still just want it. Why? You know, it serves nothing, and then now they're trying to take on this environmental, you know, stance on it. No, that's BS. That's not real. You know, give the land back. You know, we always say that, but you know, again, I always think like military always pitches this conversation of being, you know, like untouchable, but they're not. You know, Kanaka relatives are there all the time holding them accountable. They're having those hard questions. And I remember, I think it was Justine, like, when are you giving the land back? You know, that was awesome. And the guy that was there, he said, well, that's not a question I can answer. You're going to have to go higher up than me. You know, and they deflected that question so bad. And any other question related to anything with indigenous rights or, you know, or Kanaka rights and, you know, things like that. Every question was deflected, you know, and I think that's really, you know, it shows like they don't care, or they don't have the answers, or they don't want to give you answers, you know, and like that's how we're treated. That's how Kanaka people are treated. That's how Native people are treated on our own lands. You know, that, you know, military doesn't give two dog poops about us. So sorry, I'm trying not to swear. I get passionate. But yeah, so August 16, 2029, so a few more years, and hopefully that lease is up. People get the land back and things like that. So, yeah, and again, as we've all been reiterating, like, this is a long-term struggle with our Kanaka relatives down in Hawaii. This wasn't just a one-time delegation. This was the delegation to really set the standard and like what we need to work on with our relatives. But yeah, I mean, I think the reservations, the military reservations and our own reservations here are, you know, very obvious. Like there's no point to like forcing Native people and Kanaka people to do certain things on their own land. Like, just give us our land back. Give land back. Okay.
Yeah, greenwashing the military that we experienced is also a new mode of how the U.S. Navy and the task force that is tasked with overseeing as their mandate the defueling process, That is a narrative, the greenwashing narrative, that they're using to justify the renewal of U.S. Army and other leases all over the islands, right? We've fucked things up so bad, and now we're being rightly and justly held accountable for environmental destruction, that we need more time to clean up the mess that we made. So we should receive new leases at Makua or at Pohakuloa. The defueling plan was set for 2 years at Red Hill, which would mean that the 100 plus gallons of jet fuel that are still in the Red Hill bulk fuel storage facility would be completely defueled in the summer 2024. That's kind of what they proposed. And Oahu water protectors were like, that's 2 years. That's too long. Like, let's speed this up. But now, with not just the sort of estimation that 200,000 gallons of jet fuel have spilled since the facility was built, this massive spill in November 2021 of about 20,000 gallons of jet fuel. Now, the U.S. Navy has also spilled a forever chemical 1,300 gallons of AFFF, which is a firefighting foam substance that's only in the Red Hill bulk fuel storage facility to combat possible oil fires because it is a cache for jet fuel. 1,300 gallons of AFFF, which includes forever chemicals that are known as PFAS, spilled in November, at the end of November 2022, and actually spilled out of the facility into ground, into the earth. And so these forever chemicals are called forever chemicals because they don't break down. They don't break down naturally in the environment, and they don't break down naturally in our bodies. And so what this is now being turned into is a rationale for the defueling process to be extended, and also for the Navy to spin it in saying that we care about the environment, we care about these forever chemicals, we care about, the destruction, the pollution, the contamination, so much so that we need to have our leases renewed. But as you all pointed out, the people of Hawaii and Kānaka Maoli keep the receipts. We don't forget the dates. We know the times too. And we also understand that 130 years ago, it was the U.S. Navy that aided and supported the overthrowing of our sovereign, independent Hawaiian government. On January 17th, 1893, the USS Boston landed in Hawaii to support a white Euro-American oligarchic overthrow of our Queen Liliʻuokalani in 1893. Not only is the Navy continuing to destroy our islands, but it was the arm of the U.S. military machine that supported the illegal overthrow, invasion, and occupation of our country. And so January 17th is a important day for Kānaka Maoli, but also it should be an important day for anti-imperialists and indigenous peoples all over the world, because it inaugurated this incredibly devastating regime change that continues to be this tip of the spear, right? And it will continue to try to self-perpetuate in Hawaii. But at the same time, Kānaka Maoli and our allies continue to remember that day and continue to celebrate not the devastation, but to celebrate our tradition of resistance to it. My great-great-grandparents were anti-annexationists in the late 1890s. And our people today continue that tradition of anti-annexation and continue to not just ask the Navy to remediate Red Hill and to clean up their mess and to to leave, but to fully deoccupy Hawaii. And so on January 17th, 1893, that regime change occurs, illegal occupation cements itself, and 130 years later, that illegal occupation continues. But Kānaka Maoli and our relatives celebrate that day with each other because of the solidarity that is necessary to get the military out of Hawaii. And so today, the day this episode releases, is the 130th anniversary of the Navy's invasion and opening up of occupation in Hawaii. So like we said back then in 1893, and like we say today, defueling is demilitarization, and demilitarization means deoccupying Hawaii.